what I have asked you for is a literature review. A literature review will basically come right after your paper's introduction. You will have an introduction that says, I'm studying, the purpose of this paper is I am, well, you'll say it a lot better than I'm saying it off the top of my head, but this paper addresses finding a legitimate volunteer opportunity in a foreign country. And then you will go right into your literature review. A literature review is a short background section that begins your research paper by telling the reader what is already known about this topic and what we don't know yet. So you need to find these credible, substantive sources that you already pulled up for your list, and you now need to read them. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull out of them only what applies to your question. If there's other stuff in it, you do not need to talk about that other stuff. Only the stuff in these sources that actually apply and you think is interesting and important enough to put in, and you're going to synthesize that. All right, we're going to skip the definitions because we've already talked about that. Although I will point out that if you have a controversial topic, you may need to make sure you have both sides. I'll give you an example. Last semester I had a student who did a paper on community policing. All of his sources were a police perspective. None of them were a community perspective. If you have something like that that's a little controversial, for example, voluntourism, volunteering as a tourist, has some controversy associated with it. If you do that, you need to make sure that you have both sides of the story. All right. Okay, so a literature review, what are we doing? We are synthesizing the information that we found in the sources that we pulled and we have now read. A synthesis is different than an annotation. An annotation would be as if you just listed your sources and you told me what each of them said. I am not interested in you doing that. I am only interested in you noticing the things that are important that have to do with your actual question, and then writing up recurring things that come up over and over again. That's kind of what everybody knows. So you want to note what is already known, and then if there are some unusual or new things that you think should be said, we'll call those distinctions or caveats, and you want to talk about them. All right, so I actually read about 6 sources, secondary sources about bananas, so that I could write you a little paragraph showing you how I literally got 4 sources in one paragraph. And it's not about squishing things, it's just that you don't need to make this long. So I read 6 sources and I threw out 2 of them because they weren't on point, or they were weird and they didn't apply. So what I learned was that there's a banana called the Cavendish banana, and that is the kind of banana that we all get at the store. In any Western country, we are eating the Cavendish banana. That's the varietal that we commonly eat in the Western world. And what I learned from all these sources is that it is in danger of extinction because there are two diseases that seem to be wiping it out. All right, so my first sentence basically is, most scientists agree that the Cavendish banana, the varietal most commonly eaten in the Western world, is in danger of extinction due to susceptibility to 2 diseases, which I name. I found this in 2 different sources. So I cited both sources after that sentence. There's 2 sources that I summed up in one sentence. And I just noted here that that's the recurring theme, that these Cavendish bananas are susceptible to these 2 diseases. Then I found 2 other facts, though, that sort of tell me that the scientists are working to save the banana. And the first source told me that a place in France has figured out the gene sequence for the Cavendish banana. And the second source told me that tools are being developed to use with this gene sequence to identify disease-resistant genes and modify the Cavendish banana's gene sequence to preserve and protect the varietal. Okay, so here you go. Here's the thing about the gene sequence in France, and here is the other article where I found out that they are creating tools to splice in the gene to protect the banana. in this one little paragraph, I covered 4 of the 6 sources that I had pulled, and again, I threw away 2 because they weren't on point. When I actually read them, I realized I didn't care about them. All right, so the length of the literature review does not have to be long. You may have more than one question to answer, and so you may have a couple of paragraphs, or 3 or 4 even, like this, one for each of your questions that you've decided to answer, or maybe 2 for each question, just depending on how much stuff you find. But it doesn't have to be long. It's just the contextual information that sets up the reader for the rest of what you write. Okay, once you have done this literature review, you need to turn that in and go about the business of doing your primary research. If you've decided to do an interview, go ahead and get the interview done, because you're going to need that to write up your paper. This is the piece, this little literature review is the piece that is due this weekend, and the primary research needs to get done. You don't necessarily have to write it up unless you have already done it and you want to and just get ahead a little bit, but you should go out and do your research and also write up your little literature review of your secondary sources. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to connect with me and I will be happy to answer them. All right? Everything needs to be done by the end of spring break that is already due, so that counts this too, which gives you a couple of extra days if you weren't clear what you were doing. I'm not going to penalize anybody for anything that gets done by the end of spring break, but after that, you guys, no more Dr. Nice Guy. All right, because I cannot keep up with all of this regrading. And I hope you will just take advantage of this opportunity to catch up and figure out how to put some time in your calendar to make sure you get stuff done on time from here on out. Okay, that's it. Have a wonderful spring break, and let me know if you need any help.